I broke the news to my son that his dad had just passed away. He responded, "It's Melissa's birthday today, Mom. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't just lost my husband, I'd lost my son, too. He didn't even show up for the funeral, but a month later, a letter from my lawyer landed in his hands. When he opened it, he went still as a statue. I did something he'll carry with him forever, and I never uttered a single word about it. Before I dive into this story, I'd love for you to share one life lesson everyone should know before it's too late in the comments below. Thank you. George passed away right there at our kitchen table, mid-joke about me picking up the wrong cream again. Laughing, he said, "If this powdered stuff kills me, you'll finally feel real guilt," tapping his spoon on his coffee mug. Then his hand jerked. The spoon fell from his fingers. His eyes got wide, like he couldn't catch his breath. I dropped the butter knife I was holding and rushed to him, yelling his name, but he was already gone. Before I could even dial 911, before my knees hit the floor, before I could wonder if this was another one of his silly pranks, his body went slack. It wasn't a joke. The 911 operator's calm voice filled my ear while my world shattered. I kept whispering George's name, pressing on his chest as they instructed, but deep down, I knew. I could tell from the way his head tilted against his shoulder, from how icy his fingers felt when I grabbed them. When the paramedics got there, I stepped back, numb, catching words like massive, no recovery, DNR, and I just nodded, like I understood. The house was suddenly too noisy and too silent all at once. I sank onto the couch's edge, staring at the floorboards. After they covered him, after they said there was nothing more to do, I grabbed my phone. I dialed Noah, my only boy. It rang 6 times before he picked up. Shaking, I managed to say, "Noah, it's your dad." He collapsed. "He's gone." There was a long pause, then his voice, flat and far away, said, "Oh, Mom, it's Melissa's birthday today. Can I call you back?" At first, I thought I'd misheard him. Then he added, "She's got this big brunch planned, and we've got guests over." I couldn't speak, no yell, no cry, just nothing. My hand moved on its own, lowering the phone. I ended the call before I could hear anything else that would rip me apart. The room started buzzing, like my ears were under pressure. I glanced at George's chair, where he'd eat breakfast or work on crosswords late at night, still sitting there, lifeless, and I stayed by his side for what felt like hours, holding his hand, hoping it'd bring him back. Eventually, the coroner showed up. They asked if I wanted a moment alone with him. I didn't see the point. The moment I needed was already gone. I climbed the stairs, locked our bedroom door, and lay on our bed, the sheets still smelling like him. George's phone sat on the nightstand. I picked it up, praying, praying, there'd be something to hold on to. And there was. A call log from last night, 11:15 p.m., April 17, 2025. One missed call to Noah. No voicemail, no answer. George had tried to reach him. Maybe he sensed something was wrong. Maybe he felt it. And our son didn't pick up. I clutched the phone to my chest, feeling the weight of our 40-year marriage, our home filled with memories, a man who worked tirelessly so we'd never want for anything. Noah's silence screamed louder than any speech at a funeral ever could. On April 20, 2025, the day of George's funeral, it felt like I'd stepped into another world where everyone's mouths moved, but all I heard was the deafening quiet of Noah not being there. I stood by the casket, gripping the podium to stay upright, while people I hadn't seen in years came up, murmuring, "He was such a good man. We're so sorry." All I could think was that my son, my only child, wasn't in the church, wasn't by my side, wasn't even in the parking lot. The night before, when I called to confirm the funeral time, Melissa picked up and said Noah was still deciding because they'd planned a weekend trip, and canceling would cost them a lot. I stared at my phone, blinking as she went on about how her birthday mattered too, and she was keeping things upbeat for her mental health. I didn't say a word. I just hung up. I couldn't bring myself to beg my son to come to his father's funeral, not when George was the one who rocked him through colic, built Lego castles on weekends, and taught him to balance a checkbook by 13. Not when George called him the night before he died and got no answer. People noticed Noah wasn't there. Of course they did. The murmurs started before the service even kicked off. Where's Noah? Did he miss a plane? Is Melissa all right? As if they were the ones we should be concerned about. Even George's old college buddy, Fred, leaned over and said, I figured your son would be right up front today. I just nodded, pretending it wasn't tearing me apart. But what really broke me was after the service, when George's coworker, Brandon, came up by the coffee urn in the fellowship hall and said, I hate to bring it up, but last month, George mentioned something weird about helping Noah out with money. He seemed worried. That stopped me dead in my tracks because George never mentioned anything like that to me. We didn't keep secrets, or at least, I thought we didn't. I didn't ask Brandon for details. I just gave a tight smile, thanked him for coming, and slipped away to the bathroom, where I sat on the closed toilet lid, staring at the tiles until someone knocked to check on me. Nothing was okay. My son skipped his dad's funeral for a brunch and a getaway. And now I was hearing whispers of money troubles and secrets. That night, back home, the quiet in the house was suffocating. I poured a glass of wine, stared at George's empty armchair, and tried to push away the cold loneliness creeping in. Then I opened my phone and saw Melissa's Instagram post, a photo of her in a bright pink dress, holding a mimosa, captioned, Best birthday ever. Love my man. Posted right during the funeral, during the eulogy. I stared until the screen blurred and my hands trembled. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept reaching for George's hand in bed, finding nothing but cold sheets. Around 2 a.m., I got up, went to George's desk, and started digging through drawers, bank statements, insurance papers, old receipts, anything that might explain Brandon's comment. Because now it wasn't just grief eating at me. There was something sharper, colder, like I didn't even know my own family anymore. And the one person who could have explained it all, George, was gone. The next morning, April 21, 2025, I woke up with a fire in me, not curiosity, but something fiercer, like grief mixed with anger. I went straight to George's filing cabinet, the one he kept locked but always said I could open with the spare key, which I found taped behind our wedding photo in the closet, a sweet, trusting gesture that now felt like a challenge. I unlocked the drawer and started flipping through folders, stuffed with years of tax returns, retirement plans, and bank statements, all neatly sorted by month and year, like a man who never thought he'd leave a sentence unfinished. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. A thin blue folder labeled Noah Transfers was tucked away in George's files. I sank into a chair, my heart racing, and flipped through pages that revealed a quiet betrayal. There were regular bank transfers from George's account to Noah's, $1, $500 one month, $2,800 another, and one that chilled me to the bone, $10,000 marked, urgent, Melissa Medical. I stared at those numbers, half expecting them to shift if I squinted hard enough. Over the last 15 months, 12 transfers added up to $28,300. I was completely in the dark. George never breathed a word about it. We'd promised each other no secrets the day we linked our bank accounts and chose a crib for our baby boy. I kept digging, desperate for something to make sense of it all. Then I found it, a letter, folded neatly between the last two bank statements. It was scribbled on yellow legal paper, the kind George always kept stacked on his desk. It wasn't written to me. It was for Noah. Noah, it began, this is the second time you've told your mom one thing and done something else. I've stayed quiet, hoping you were being straight with us, but if you lie about Melissa's expenses again or misuse this money, I'll have to cut you off completely. I love you, but I won't let you betray your mother's trust. It wasn't signed, but I'd know George's handwriting anywhere, as familiar as the lines on his hands. He never mailed it. It was dated March 28, 2025, just 3 weeks before he passed. I sat there, clutching the letter, my hands shaking, the paper crinkling under my fingers. My mind kept replaying Noah's voice on the phone after I told him his dad was gone, calm, annoyed, like I'd asked him to reschedule a haircut. I couldn't catch my breath. I couldn't even cry. I just sat, frozen, realizing the man I loved had spent his final months quietly wrestling with our son's lies, protecting me from the truth. And Noah, who couldn't be bothered to come to the funeral, had taken tens of thousands of dollars while acting like everything was fine. I slid the folder back into the drawer, locked it, and hid the key behind our wedding photo where it always stayed, not out of respect, but because I needed time to process. It wasn't just about the money or the lies, it was about what kind of person my son had turned into and whether I had the strength to finish what George couldn't. I sat at the kitchen table, right where George took his last breath 4 days earlier, staring at his unwashed coffee mug still sitting in the sink. I didn't know my next step, but one thing was clear: I was done acting like everything was okay. Noah showed up out of the blue on April 26, 2025, 6 days after the funeral, as if a late appearance could somehow make up for his absence. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, his eyes uneasy and hollow, I didn't feel a wave of relief. I felt like I was looking at a stranger, like he was here out of duty, or worse, to cover his tracks. Melissa was behind him, waiting in their idling car in the driveway, ready to bolt the second things got heavy, which told me everything before he even spoke. "Mom," he said, and I stepped aside silently, letting him into the living room where George's chair still sat, untouched, like a silent reminder of everything Noah had ignored. Out of habit, I offered him coffee, but he waved it off, squirming on the couch's edge like he was itching to leave. When he finally spoke, his voice was stiff, overly polite. "Melissa said I should have come earlier, and she's probably right." I almost laughed, because of course it was her idea. Not guilt, not love, not his own heart, just Melissa nudging him to fix it, like he was managing a bad review. I nodded slowly, settling across from him, my phone already recording from my cardigan pocket because I didn't trust myself to catch every lie or dodge. And I sure didn't trust him not to twist this conversation later, especially after what I'd found in George's files. "Did you know your dad called you the night before he passed?" I asked, watching for a reaction, and there it was, a quick twitch in his jaw, then a shrug, like it didn't matter. My phone was on silent. We were out at dinner. "Melissa had this surprise thing planned," he said, stopping short, like he heard how flimsy it sounded. I let the silence hang, heavy and uncomfortable, until he started rambling with more weak excuses. I was going to call him back, I swear. But I didn't know it was serious. He never mentioned being sick. Neither did you. I kept my face blank, hiding how much that stung, how fast he tried to pin it on me, like his absence was my fault, like George's death was a group scheduling mistake. He wasn't sick, Noah. He had a heart attack at the breakfast table, joking about coffee creamer 5 minutes before, I said, my voice flat, and he looked away, rubbing his forehead like I was making this harder than it needed to be. Then I leaned in and said it straight, I know about the money transfers. His whole body went rigid, like I'd lit a fuse. "What money?" he asked, too loud, too fast, and I didn't soften the blow. "The ones from Dad's account to yours. For Melissa's medical bills, your vacation, the rent you couldn't cover." "Don't lie to me, Noah." "Not today." He had the nerve to look insulted. "Those were loans, Mom. We were struggling. Dad offered to help." That's when I handed him the yellow letter, the one George wrote but never sent, the one warning Noah that the money would stop if he kept lying. He read it quietly, then folded it up like it wasn't proof of who he'd become and said, he didn't mean that. And in that moment, I wasn't talking to my son, not the little boy who'd nap on George's chest during football games, not the teenager who helped his dad build a shed in the backyard, but a man who'd learned to justify his own betrayal. All I felt was a cold, clear certainty. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a man who'd chosen, again and again, to put his own comfort above our family. And now he was here because Melissa told him to clean up his mess. I got up, walked to the door, and said, "I'll let you know if I need to talk." He looked like he wanted to say something, but Melissa honked from the driveway, and he just nodded, leaving without a hug, without even asking how I was holding up. I watched him get in the car, watched Melissa glance at the house with that smirk she probably didn't even realize she wore when she thought she'd won something. And I thought, you have no idea what's coming. The morning after Noah's visit, April 27, 2025, I woke up with a calmness that almost scared me, the kind that comes not from peace, but from decision. I didn't even make coffee before calling Andrew Kane, our longtime attorney, the man who handled George's business filings for decades and sent us anniversary cards without fail. When I told him I needed to revise my will immediately, he didn't ask questions, just scheduled me for the next day, April 28, 2025. I gathered everything: bank statements, the folder of Noah's transfers, George's unsent letter, and the audio file of Noah's pathetic half-confession from the day before. Then I added one final item, a handwritten letter to Amelia, our granddaughter, to be opened on her 18th birthday in 2030. Because whatever else happened in this family, that little girl deserved to know the truth, not the version her mother would spin or the silence Noah would try to pass off as dignity. When I walked into Andrew's office, he took one look at my face and said, "I assume this is about more than estate planning." I nodded, handed him the documents, and said, "Everything goes into a trust, every account, every asset, the house, the annuity, George's stocks. But not for Noah, not for Melissa, not a cent." He didn't blink, just opened a legal pad and started writing. We structured it so that Amelia would inherit everything, but not until she turned 26 in 2038, with early access only for educational expenses and housing, no luxury cars, no guilt-driven teenage bribes. I asked Andrew to include a clause that if Noah or Melissa ever attempted to challenge the will, Amelia would gain full control immediately, and they'd forfeit all rights, including visitation during the trust's active years. I knew it sounded harsh, but when a parent chooses brunch over a funeral and a spouse chooses manipulation over mourning, you stop worrying about diplomacy and start protecting the only piece of your husband still left on earth. Andrew reviewed everything twice, added a section for the letter I'd written, sealed in a manila envelope labeled for Amelia on her 18th birthday, May 17, 2030, and included a transcript of Noah's visit confirming the deception, the financial abuse, and the emotional abandonment. Then he looked at me and said, "This is solid, Clara. No loopholes, no weak points, but it's going to hit him hard." And I said, "That's the point, Andrew. It's supposed to." The final draft was notarized and filed within 2 hours, and I walked out feeling not like I'd won, but like I'd reclaimed something, a boundary, a line in the sand George had never quite been able to draw. And it wasn't revenge. It was reality. If my son wanted to treat his parents like ATM machines with no expiration date, then he'd find out just how long that machine had been watching, documenting, waiting for the exact moment to cut the cord. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and reread the letter I wrote to Amelia, 5 pages of truth, not bitterness, explaining who her grandfather really was, what he'd done for her father, and how that kindness had been turned into leverage and lies. I told her the money she would one day receive wasn't a gift, it was a responsibility, a reminder to choose love over convenience, loyalty over appearances, and courage over compliance, because she was the only one left in our family who still had a chance to do it right. When I sealed that envelope, I felt like I'd closed a chapter, not of grief, but of silence, the kind that creeps in when people you love betray you slowly enough that you forget it's betrayal at all, until one day you're standing at a funeral with no one beside you. And now, finally, I had made sure that silence would not be passed down. The letter landed in Noah's mailbox on May 2, 2025, sent by certified mail with a delivery confirmation slip that hit my inbox at 10:47 a.m. I imagined him standing in his kitchen, flipping through envelopes like it was any other Tuesday, until he saw the law firm's logo stamped in the corner. I knew the moment he opened it because he didn't call, didn't text, didn't email, not that day, not the next. But Melissa did, with a string of rapid-fire texts that ranged from passive-aggressive, "Wow, classy, Clara," to openly hostile, "You're unbelievable. Do you even care about Amelia?" I didn't reply, because that silence was the most honest thing I could give them. When I finally picked up the phone on May 5, 2025, it was Noah calling from a blocked number, his voice low, uncertain, almost soft, like he thought maybe if he used the tone he used when he was 7 and scared to admit he'd broken something, I'd melt into the mom he remembered from before this all turned to ash. He started with, "Mom, I just got the letter," like I didn't already know, like the last 72 hours hadn't been thick with the weight of his reaction. I said nothing, just let the silence speak. When he finally said, "Is this real?" I answered, "You tell me," because there was nothing left to explain. The pause that followed felt like the longest 8 seconds of my life before he finally said, "I didn't know Dad felt that way." And I snapped, not screamed, not raged, just snapped into ice. "You didn't know because you never asked, Noah. You were too busy pretending we were optional." That was when Melissa picked up on the other line, her voice sharp, demanding, "You can't actually disinherit your own son. That's insane." And I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how predictable she was, how quickly the mask dropped when the money dried up. I said, "I didn't disinherit him. I protected Amelia." Melissa scoffed, "From us?" like she couldn't even conceive of herself as a threat. And I answered, "From this moment, this conversation, this entitlement." Before she could spit out whatever venom she had next, I hung up, because that was the boundary. You don't get to choose neglect and then demand access. You don't get to opt out of grief and then claim inheritance. You don't get to erase the funeral and then rewrite the will. I sat at the kitchen table afterward, same spot where George's heart gave out 18 days ago, staring at the quiet that followed, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to stillness, not happiness, not closure, but control, like I had finally done the thing George couldn't bring himself to do before it was too late. Later that night, I got one more text from Noah. It just said, "I don't know how we come back from this." I didn't reply, because the answer wasn't mine to give anymore. It was Amelia's. And one day, when she was old enough to understand everything, she would decide who earned a place in her future. That was the legacy I was leaving behind. They showed up on May 19, 2025, without warning. Melissa stepped out of the car in heels too high for a driveway confrontation, Noah trailing behind her like he wasn't sure whether he was there to support her or contain her. The second I opened the front door, she started in, not with a greeting, not with a question, but with an accusation. "You're manipulating this family through legal threats," her voice sharp and practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. I stood in the doorway without moving, not inviting them in, not budging an inch, just letting the weight of her words hit the silence between us. Then she added, "You're punishing us for setting boundaries." That was when I saw it, the smug tilt of her head, the belief that somehow she still held the moral high ground, even after skipping George's funeral, even after siphoning money through Noah, even after trying to play victim in a story she wrote with her own hands. I watched Noah climb into the car, saw Melissa shoot a glance at the house with that smug little smirk she didn't even know she flashed when she thought she'd come out on top. In my head, I thought, "You don't have a clue what's headed your way." The next morning, April 27, 2025, I woke up with a strange calm that almost unnerved me, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that settles in when you've made up your mind. Before I even thought about brewing coffee, I dialed Andrew Kane, our trusted lawyer who'd handled George's business paperwork for years and never missed sending us an anniversary card. When I told him I needed to update my will right away, he didn't pry, just booked me for the next day, April 28, 2025. I gathered everything I'd found, the bank statements, the folder of Noah's transfers, George's unsent letter, and the audio of Noah's weak excuses from the day before. Then I added one more thing, a letter I wrote by hand for Amelia, our granddaughter, to be opened on her 18th birthday in 2030. No matter what went down in this family, that sweet girl deserved to know the real story, not the version her mom would twist or the silence Noah would try to pass off as honor. When I stepped into Andrew's office, he took one look at my face and said, "This is about more than just sorting out your estate, isn't it?" I nodded, handed over the stack of documents, and said, "Put everything into a trust, every account, every asset, the house, the annuity, George's stocks, but not a dime for Noah or Melissa." He didn't flinch, just grabbed a legal pad and started jotting notes. We set it up so Amelia would inherit it all, but only when she turned 26 in 2038, with access before then just for school costs or a place to live, no fancy cars, no bribes to win her over as a teenager. I told Andrew to add a rule: if Noah or Melissa ever tried to fight the will, Amelia would get full control right away, and they'd lose everything, even visitation rights while the trust was active. It felt harsh, but when your son picks a brunch over his dad's funeral and his wife chooses manipulation over grief, you stop caring about being polite and start guarding the last piece of your husband still left in this world. Andrew went over every detail twice, included a section for the letter I'd written, sealed in an envelope marked for Amelia on May 17, 2030, and attached a transcript of Noah's visit that laid bare his lies, the financial manipulation, and the way he'd abandoned us emotionally. Then he looked at me and said, "This is airtight, Clara. No gaps, no weak spots, but it's going to hit Noah like a freight train." I replied, "Good, Andrew. That's exactly what I want." We finalized and notarized the will in 2 hours flat, and as I left, I didn't feel victorious, just like I'd finally drawn a line in the sand that George never could. It wasn't about getting even. It was about facing the truth. If my son thought he could treat his parents like a bottomless bank account, he was about to learn that this bank had been keeping track, watching, and waiting for the moment to shut him out. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and reread the 5-page letter I'd written to Amelia, not out of spite, but to share the truth about who her grandpa really was, how much he'd done for her dad, and how that kindness got twisted into lies and leverage. I told her the money she'd one day get wasn't just a gift, it was a duty, a reminder to choose love over ease, loyalty over show, and courage over going along with things, because she was the only one left in our family with a shot to get it right. When I sealed that envelope, it felt like I'd ended a chapter, not of sorrow, but of the quiet betrayal that sneaks in when the people you love chip away at you so slowly you don't realize it's betrayal until you're standing alone at a funeral. Now, at last, I'd made sure that silence wouldn't be handed down to her. The letter arrived at Noah's house on May 2, 2025, sent by certified mail, with a delivery confirmation that pinged my inbox at 10:47 a.m. I pictured him in his kitchen, sorting through the mail like it was just another Tuesday, until he spotted the law firm's logo in the corner. I knew the second he opened it because he didn't call, didn't text, didn't email, not that day, not the next. But Melissa did, firing off texts that started snarky, "Real classy move, Clara," and ended hostile, "You're unbelievable. Do you even care about Amelia?" I didn't respond, because staying silent was the most honest answer I could give them. When I finally answered the phone on May 5, 2025, it was Noah calling from a blocked number, his voice low and hesitant, like he thought he could use the same soft tone he did at 7 when he'd broken something and hoped I'd forgive him. He started with, "Mom, I got the letter," as if I didn't already know, as if the past 3 days hadn't been heavy with his reaction. I stayed quiet, letting the silence do the talking. When he finally asked, "Is this for real?" I said, "You tell me, Noah," because I had nothing left to explain. The pause that came next felt like the longest 8 seconds I'd ever lived through before he said, "I didn't know Dad felt like that." And I broke, not with a scream or a rant, just a cold, sharp snap. "You didn't know because you never bothered to ask, Noah. You were too busy acting like we didn't matter." Then Melissa jumped in on the line, her voice cutting like a knife. "You can't seriously cut out your own son. That's crazy." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because she was so predictable, dropping her mask the second the money stopped flowing. I said, "I didn't cut him out. I protected Amelia." Melissa snorted, "From us?" like she couldn't imagine being the problem. I replied, "From this moment, this call, this sense of entitlement." Before she could fire back with more poison, I hung up, because that was the line. You don't get to choose neglect and then demand a payout. You don't get to skip the grief and claim the inheritance. You don't get to miss the funeral and rewrite the story. Afterward, I sat at the kitchen table, right where George's heart stopped 18 days earlier, soaking in the quiet, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to calm, not joy, not peace, but control, like I'd finally done what George couldn't before it was too late. Later that night, Noah sent one more text, "I don't know how we come back from this." I didn't answer, because it wasn't my question to answer anymore. It was Amelia's. One day, when she was old enough to understand, she'd decide who deserved a place in her life. That was the legacy I was leaving her. They showed up unannounced on May 19, 2025. Melissa stepped out of the car in heels too tall for a driveway showdown, Noah trailing behind like he wasn't sure if he was there to back her up or hold her back. The moment I opened the door, she launched in, no hello, no questions, just an accusation. You're tearing this family apart with your legal games, her voice sharp and rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. I stood in the doorway, not budging, not inviting them in, letting her words crash into the silence between us. Then she added, "You're punishing us for having boundaries." That's when I saw it, the smug tilt of her head, the certainty that she still held the high ground, even after skipping George's funeral, even after draining money through Noah, even after trying to play the victim in a mess she'd created herself. I didn't say a word, just stepped aside to let them in, mostly because I knew Amelia was upstairs, quietly listening from the hallway like kids do, and part of me wanted her to hear this, not to wound her, but to arm her with the truth. Melissa marched into the living room, her perfume overwhelming, her words even heavier, while Noah sat silently, staring at the floor as she took charge, like always. "We've spoken to a lawyer," she declared, arms folded tightly. "If you don't change this will, we might have grounds to question your mental state." I kept my voice steady, calm. "Are you saying you'd try to call me crazy?" Melissa gave a casual shrug. "I'm just saying grief can mess with people's heads. It happens." I caught Noah wince, whether from shame or guilt, I couldn't tell. Then I heard a soft creak from the upstairs hallway, Amelia shifting, eavesdropping, and I knew every word we said was sinking into the one person in this family who still had a clear view of the truth. I looked at Noah and asked, "Do you back her up on this?" He stayed silent, swallowing hard, his eyes darting away. That quiet spoke louder than anything Melissa could throw at me, telling me what I needed to know. He wouldn't stand up to her, wouldn't defend me or his dad's memory, not if it meant rocking the boat at home. Melissa seized his silence like kindling, stepping closer and saying, "You're the one ripping this family apart over money." I let out a single, dry chuckle, not mocking, just the kind that slips out when something's so ridiculous it's almost tragic. "Me, tearing us apart? George died alone, Noah didn't even show up, and you're worried about the inheritance." That's when I saw Amelia appear halfway down the stairs, her eyes wide but steady. Melissa spun around, caught off guard, but Amelia didn't speak, just looked at her dad, then at me, before turning and heading back upstairs. That silent moment hung in the air like a storm about to break. Melissa sensed it too, her confidence flickering for the first time. "She doesn't get it," she said. I replied, "She gets more than you realize." Then I swung the front door open wide and said, "We're finished here." Noah got up without a fight, walking out ahead of Melissa, who paused for a split second like she might say more, but then followed, her heels clicking sharply on the tile. I closed the door before her foot hit the porch. On June 9, 2025, I found a small black flash drive in an envelope slipped into my mailbox. No note, no label, just my name in Amelia's careful 13-year-old handwriting. My stomach dropped because I knew this wasn't some playful gesture or a digital birthday card. This was something heavy, something hidden. When I plugged it into my laptop, I sat in stunned silence as folders opened like windows into a world I'd been kept from. Each folder was labeled by date, packed with files that turned my gut, recordings of phone calls, screenshots of texts, even shaky videos shot from behind Amelia's bedroom door, clear enough to catch every word Noah and Melissa thought was private. In a recording from May 25, 2025, Melissa's voice was sharp and furious. "She's playing everyone with that will. If Amelia takes her side, I swear, Noah, will pull her out of school and homeschool her until she thinks straight." Another, from May 30, 2025, caught Noah's quieter, more chilling tone. "Just let Mom do her thing. We weren't banking on the money right now anyway. If Amelia plays along, she can help us out later." I sat frozen, hearing my son talk about my estate like it was a chessboard, like I was a pawn to outmaneuver instead of his mother. The worst was a video labeled "Kitchen Night, June 2, 2025, where Melissa, leaning against the sink, whispered into her phone, "If we push her just a bit more, she'll break. We'll say she's confused, maybe get the lawyer to question her mental state." Then, boom, the trust gets flagged. I heard Amelia's breath hitch just before the video cut off. It broke my heart, Melissa's boldness, yes, but more than that, the fact that my granddaughter was shielding me while I was trying to shield her. At the bottom of the folders was a short text file, a few lines that hit like a fist. Grandma, I didn't know who else to tell. I hear things when they think I'm asleep. I know they're lying. I believe you. I'm saving this in case you need it. I stared at those words for what felt like forever, longer than anything since George's letter. I realized the legacy I was leaving wasn't just about money or trust clauses or settling scores. It was about Amelia, alone in a house where truth was treated like a threat, gathering proof to protect the one adult who hadn't let her down. I made 2 copies of the drive, one for Andrew, one locked in my safe. I wrote a new letter to Amelia, sealed and dated June 10, 2025, to be opened if anything happened to me before her 18th birthday in 2030, because I needed her to know I believed her and trusted her. If she ever had to face a judge, a counselor, or anyone questioning her, she'd have evidence that she saw everything and never looked away. That night, I didn't cry or get angry. I just sat in George's chair, holding that tiny flash drive like it was both a weapon and a treasure. I made a promise, not just to safeguard Amelia's inheritance, but to protect her voice, because in this family, she was the first to be brave enough to speak up. The mediation happened on July 15, 2025, in a bland downtown office, a beige room with polite chairs and bottled water on a glass table, designed to feel safe while everyone geared up for battle. When Noah and Melissa walked in, Melissa dressed like she was auditioning for a legal drama, Noah looking like he'd aged a decade in a month. I didn't say hello or offer a smile, just sat with Andrew beside me. In front of me was a neat stack of papers, Amelia's flash drive files, the bank transfers, George's unsent letter, and the transcript of Noah's recorded visit, like a quiet warning wrapped in documents. The mediator introduced herself with a warm, even tone, asking us why we'd come to this meeting. Melissa jumped right in, spinning a tale of me as a grieving, spiteful woman, hinting that my choices were clouded by emotional turmoil or maybe even a slipping mind. I watched her perform her victim act like she'd rehearsed it, while Noah sat next to her, quiet, his face pale, his eyes dodging mine every time I glanced his way. When my turn came, I kept my voice steady, no shaking, no shouting. I just slid the folder across the table and said, "This tells the real story." I saw the mediator's eyes scan page after page, dates, bank transfers, George's handwritten notes, the list of audio files, and finally Amelia's flash drive, labeled simply, evidence. The air in the room changed, like the truth had shattered Melissa's carefully built illusion, especially when the mediator paused, looked at her, and asked, "Did you know your daughter recorded you discussing ways to manipulate a legal trust?" Melissa's face went white as she stammered, "She's only 13. She doesn't get the full picture." But it was too late, her words were out there, the recordings were real, and her story fell apart fast. The mediator turned to Noah, asking if he wanted to say anything. He stayed silent, rubbing his hands together like he could scrub away his own guilt. I looked at him and said, "She tried to tell you." That's when Melissa lost it, not defending herself, but erupting in raw anger, slamming her hand on the table and shouting, "This is all because you couldn't deal with George's death. Now you're punishing us because you're alone." The mediator calmly asked her to step outside to cool off. Melissa stormed out, her heels echoing down the hall, leaving Noah sitting there alone. For the first time since George's funeral, Noah spoke to me directly, his voice quiet, worn out. I didn't realize it had gotten this bad. I replied, "You didn't want to see it." He nodded slowly, staring at the floor. "I just wanted things to be easy." I told him, ease doesn't come from staying quiet. It comes from standing up when it counts. When the mediator came back, she said there was no ground to challenge the trust, it was legally ironclad, backed by solid evidence, and Amelia's recordings showed clear pressure at home. Melissa didn't return, not even to hear the decision. Noah left soon after, slipping out quietly, no handshake, no glance back. I lingered for a moment, gathering my papers, and felt an odd wave wash over me, not victory or relief, but a quiet kind of sorrow, the kind you feel when a fight ends, not because you came out on top, but because the truth finally made it impossible for anyone to keep up the charade. On May 17, 2030, Amelia turned 18, and the day wasn't marked by balloons or cake, but by a soft knock on my door just after 1 p.m. Her eyes were bright but steady as she stepped inside, holding the letter I'd written her 5 years earlier, still sealed. "I wanted us to read it together," she said. I didn't speak, just nodded and watched her carefully open the envelope, handling it like it might crumble, unfolding the 5 pages I'd poured my heart into when everything felt like it was falling apart. She read in silence for a few minutes, her face shifting from focus to tears, stopping only once to ask, "Is this all still true?" I answered, every single word. She wrapped her arms around me tighter than ever, whispering, "Thank you for giving me the truth when no one else did." That hug held all my pain and purpose. Afterward, we sat in George's old chair together. She pulled out her phone and showed me a video of her standing in front of a judge at a name change hearing, saying clearly, "I want to change my middle name to Claraline, after my grandmother." I couldn't hold back the tears then, my heart breaking open at the sound of her choosing a piece of our family that didn't hurt her, didn't lie, didn't use her as a bargaining chip. Later that day, we went to her graduation, and when they called out her new name, Amelia Claraline Whitfield, as she crossed the stage, she looked straight at me and smiled. In her face, I saw not just pride, but the kind of clarity George had when he made tough calls no one understood until later. Noah was there too, sitting alone in the back, eyes red, suit rumpled, clapping more out of duty than joy. He didn't come near me or Amelia, not because he wasn't allowed, but because I think he finally grasped what it meant to be cut off in ways that went beyond money. After the ceremony, Amelia ran to me first, hugged me again, and whispered, "I'm living with you next semester." My roommate bailed. I laughed through my tears, knowing I'd get another year of her laughter, her music filling the house, her toothbrush in my bathroom, like a small triumph over everything Melissa tried to control. We didn't mention Melissa that day, not once, because by then she'd faded into the background, her silence louder than any apology she never offered. That night, as I tucked Amelia into her old childhood room, I left the door cracked open, just like always. She said, "You gave me a life I didn't know I could have." I kissed her forehead and said, "You chose it, sweetheart. I just made the way clear." As I walked down the hall past George's photo on the wall, I touched the frame and whispered, "She's going to be all right, love. We're going to be all right." For the first time in years, I actually meant it.